You were taught to fear your anger, not because it was dangerous though. Sometimes it is, but because it was inconvenient, because it made others uncomfortable, because it didn't fit neatly into the box labeled good person. So you did what you were told. You buried it, smiled through it, softened your voice, and nodded politely even as your insides boiled. But here's the paradox that no one wants to touch. What if the emotion you've spent your entire life suppressing is the very thing that could set you free? Think about it. How many times have you felt the fire rise in your chest, only to choke it down like poison? How many injustices have you tolerated with a quiet "it's fine," when deep down you were screaming? And what did that suppression do to you? Did it make you better, calmer, kinder? Or did it just hollow you up bit by bit until you forgot how to feel anything with real intensity? We live in a world that idolizes positivity and composure, even as it seethes with unspoken rage. Just stay calm. Be the bigger person. Anger is toxic. These mantras swirl like incense around modern self-help, masking a quiet cruelty. The idea that anger is a weakness to overcome, rather than a truth to be understood. But what if anger isn't the enemy? What if your anger is a sacred signal, a boundary being crossed, a lie being tolerated, a life being unlived? You've been conditioned to see anger as a threat. But what if it's a compass that doesn't point north or south, but towards something far more vital? Your unmet needs, your suppressed desires, your unlived potential. Every time you feel anger rise and then crush it under forced politeness or guilt, you're not becoming more virtuous, you're becoming more tamed, more domesticated, more compliant with the version of you that society finds acceptable. And here's the chilling truth. The more you bury your anger, the more you bury yourself. So ask yourself, when was the last time you allowed your anger to speak without censorship? What truth might it have been trying to scream into your silence? And what if the very pain you're avoiding is actually the key to your transformation? Maybe the question isn't how do I control my anger? Maybe the real question is, what is my anger trying to awaken in me? There is a force inside you, not chaotic, not destructive, but wild. And perhaps it has been waiting for you to stop apologizing for it, to stop moralizing it, to stop seeing it as a flaw. Because maybe, just maybe, your growth doesn't begin with peace. Maybe it begins with fire. And that fire, it's not meant to burn you alive. It's meant to burn away everything false. You weren't born afraid of your anger. You learned it, not through reason, but through repetition, through side eyes at the dinner table, through teachers praising well-behaved silence over defiant truth, through religions that canonized meekness and condemned fire, through parents who, perhaps well-meaning, were terrified of their own rage, so they taught you to fear yours too. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your emotional landscape was colonized. Anger was exiled, and in its place, compliance was crowned. But what happens when a part of you is exiled? What happens when a core human emotion and evolutionary signal of threat, injustice, and selfhood is deemed unworthy of expression? Carl Jung had a name for this hidden process. The shadow. It's the part of you you've disowned. The part that contains everything you've labeled unacceptable: your rage, your lust, your power, your voice. It's not gone. It's repressed. And like a pressure valve with nowhere to release, it builds quietly, dangerously. You might not scream, but you implode. You might not hit, but you self-sabotage. You might not lash out, but you shut down, numb out, disappear from your own life. We often think of repression as moral, but Jung would argue the opposite. What we repress owns us more fully than what we express. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What if your hidden anger has already been directing your life? Schopenhauer, the brooding philosopher of will and suffering, believed that much of our agony stems from a denial of our true nature. We try to outthink pain. We numb desire. We shun any emotion that disrupts the facade of control. But pain repressed is pain recycled over and over. In our relationships, our careers, our self-worth. And anger, it doesn't vanish when ignored. It mutates into passive aggression, into chronic anxiety, into depression so thick it feels like sleepwalking through your own story. There's a reason Viktor Frankl, in The Crucible of Auschwitz, wrote that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. In other words, your anger is not wrong, it is wise. It arises where truth has been violated within or without. But modern culture pathologizes anger. We sanitize it, wrap it in clinical terms, redirect it toward productive outlets. But no one asks the deeper question: why does this anger exist in the first place? Nietzsche, ever the provocateur, saw anger not as a flaw but as a life-affirming instinct to roar against resignation. He warned us that when man suppresses his instincts, he becomes domesticated and resentful. Beware the man in whom the will to power has been repressed, he said, for he will turn his fury not upward, but inward. So here we are, a society of people smiling through clenched jaws, medicated into obedience, praising emotional restraint as if it were spiritual enlightenment. Meanwhile, the soul rots from underuse. We are taught that peace is the absence of conflict. But what if real peace only arises after we confront the war within? What if that gnawing irritation, that quiet resentment, that irrational explosion you couldn't explain, they weren't flaws? They were flares, messages from the psyche, alarms sounding off. You are betraying yourself, and perhaps the true betrayal is not in expressing anger, but in muting it. You see, beneath every outburst is a buried boundary, a violated value, a silenced voice, and when those parts of you remain unheard long enough, they twist. They either lash out or shut down. And here's the tragic irony: the more we suppress anger to be good, the further we drift from what is actually true. So let's turn this inside out. What if anger isn't the opposite of growth, but the start of it? What if anger isn't dangerous when felt but only when denied? And what if your anger, once faced without shame, could become your most honest compass? You were not meant to live life sedated. You were meant to feel it all and transform through it. This is not about permission to rage recklessly. This is about giving anger back its wisdom, reclaiming its rightful seat at the table of your humanity. Because until you do, you will keep calling numbness peace, and silence strength, and repression maturity. And one day, you will wake up and not recognize the life you've quietly complied with, unless you begin to listen to the flame within. It's not the loudest flames that burn the deepest. It's the slow, smoldering ones, the ones you never see, the ones hidden behind forced smiles, polite nods, and spiritual bypassing, the ones cloaked as kindness, but carry a bitter aftertaste. These are the consequences of unacknowledged anger. But here's the cruel irony. You've been told that suppressing your anger makes you strong, that it's noble to forgive instantly, commendable to rise above, and spiritual to feel nothing when betrayed. So you swallowed your rage again, and again, and again, and in return you got ulcers, anxiety, burnout, insomnia, resentment that simmers in your stomach like acid until one day, the bitterness becomes so familiar that it starts to feel like your personality. This is what repression does. It doesn't erase the fire. It buries it underground. And beneath the surface, it spreads like roots unseen, but everywhere. Your relationships, they suffer first. When anger isn't allowed expression, it seeps out sideways. You withdraw love as punishment. You give the silent treatment. You grow sarcastic instead of sincere. You use words as weapons, or worse, deny yourself the words altogether. Passive aggression becomes the new normal. And slowly, people stop recognizing the real you, because even you have forgotten where you end and your defense mechanisms begin. But the damage doesn't stop with relationships. It shapes your worldview. Psychologically, unresolved anger becomes a lens, a distorted filter through which every experience is judged. Neuroscience tells us that when emotions like anger go unprocessed, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, stays activated. That means your nervous system is constantly scanning for danger, even when there is none. This is why a slightly raised voice can feel like an attack, why honest feedback feels like rejection, why love itself feels unsafe because it demands vulnerability, and vulnerability makes the hidden rage tremble. And when you feel chronically unsafe, you begin to interpret everything as personal. Even silence feels hostile. Even rest feels like guilt. Eventually, anger doesn't just distort how you see others, it distorts how you see yourself. You begin to believe you're inherently too much or not enough, that your feelings are burdens, your emotions threats, your voice a liability. And in this crucible of confusion, you start to confuse suppression with strength. But it's not strength, it's self-erasure. This is how culture wins. Society doesn't need to silence you if you silence yourself. It doesn't need to oppress you when you internalize your own oppression. You become a docile worker, a team player, a model citizen who confuses overachievement with worth, and people-pleasing with morality, all while your body whispers the truth in symptoms. The clenched jaw, the tight chest, the constant fatigue. These aren't random, they're messages. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote, and when anger is ignored, the body turns into a battlefield where you become both the prisoner and the warden. Let's zoom out. Culturally, we are addicted to calmness, but not the real kind. The manicured calmness of yoga influencers, wellness slogans, and spiritual bypassing. Good vibes only isn't peace, it's denial dressed in pastel. Meanwhile, righteous anger against injustice, betrayal, manipulation is dismissed as hysteria or emotional instability. You see this everywhere. The woman labeled crazy for standing up to abuse, the activist mocked for caring too much, the child called difficult for expressing emotion. It's all the same message. Be quiet, stay small, swallow the fire. But when enough people do this, a society emerges where nothing ever truly changes, because change doesn't come from contentment. It comes from discontent, from the holy rage of realizing things should not stay the same. This is why anger matters, because beneath it lies your boundaries, your values, your vision of what could be. You've been taught to fear the burn, but perhaps it's not fire that's dangerous. It's forgetting you were born to carry it. So ask yourself, what dreams have you postponed out of fear of seeming too intense? What truths have you buried just to keep the peace? What parts of yourself have you silenced to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your fullness? These are not harmless sacrifices. They are the unseen deaths we die each day we deny our rage. That means your nervous system is constantly scanning for danger, even when there is none. This is why a slightly raised voice can feel like an attack, why honest feedback feels like rejection, why love itself feels unsafe because it demands vulnerability, and vulnerability makes the hidden rage tremble. And when you feel chronically unsafe, you begin to interpret everything as personal. Even silence feels hostile. Even rest feels like guilt. Eventually, anger doesn't just distort how you see others, it distorts how you see yourself. You begin to believe you're inherently too much or not enough, that your feelings are burdens, your emotions threats, your voice a liability. And in this crucible of confusion, you start to confuse suppression with strength. But it's not strength, it's self-erasure. This is how culture wins. Society doesn't need to silence you if you silence yourself. It doesn't need to oppress you when you internalize your own oppression. You become a docile worker, a team player, a model citizen who confuses overachievement with worth, and people-pleasing with morality, all while your body whispers the truth in symptoms. The clenched jaw, the tight chest, the constant fatigue. These aren't random, they're messages. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote, and when anger is ignored, the body turns into a battlefield where you become both the prisoner and the warden. Let's zoom out. Culturally, we are addicted to calmness, but not the real kind. The manicured calmness of yoga influencers, wellness slogans, and spiritual bypassing. Good vibes only isn't peace, it's denial dressed in pastel. Meanwhile, righteous anger against injustice, betrayal, manipulation is dismissed as hysteria or emotional instability. You see this everywhere. The woman labeled crazy for standing up to abuse. The activist mocked for caring too much. The child called difficult for expressing emotion. It's all the same message. Be quiet, stay small, swallow the fire. But when enough people do this, a society emerges where nothing ever truly changes. Because change doesn't come from contentment. It comes from discontent, from the holy rage of realizing things should not stay the same. This is why anger matters, because beneath it lies your boundaries, your values, your vision of what could be. You've been taught to fear the burn, but perhaps it's not fire that's dangerous. It's forgetting you were born to carry it. So ask yourself, what dreams have you postponed out of fear of seeming too intense? What truths have you buried just to keep the peace? What parts of yourself have you silenced to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your fullness? These are not harmless sacrifices. They are the unseen deaths we die each day we deny our rage. And unless we turn inward, unless we sit with the storm rather than suppress it, we risk becoming strangers in our own skin, functioning, smiling, contributing, yet quietly disconnected from the truth of who we are. But here's the good news. Just as repression distorts, awareness restores. And awareness begins the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is my anger trying to protect?" You weren't meant to live in quiet agony. You weren't made to tremble under the weight of swallowed words and pacified instincts. Know somewhere deep within you, there's a voice you buried long ago. It didn't die. It went underground. And now, it's knocking furious, fierce, alive. The question is, will you answer? Breaking free doesn't begin with peace. It begins with permission. Permission to feel what you were told was inappropriate. Permission to rage, to roar, to reclaim the parts of you that were forced into exile. That's the rebellion. But here's the catch. This rebellion isn't loud, not at first. It begins in the silence of your own confrontation. When you look in the mirror and realize that the enemy was never your anger, the enemy was your conditioning. You've been taught that anger is dangerous. And to be fair, unconscious anger is. But conscious anger that is owned, understood, and channeled is one of the most transformative forces on earth. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." The repression of anger turns it into a shadow, but facing it, that turns it into a guide. So, what does breaking free actually look like? First, you stop apologizing for your intensity. You start honoring your discomfort instead of numbing it. You stop trying to be palatable. You begin to see that your emotions are not random inconveniences, they are messengers. Each one carries a truth. Rage says, a boundary has been violated. Frustration says, something deeply matters. Irritation says, you're betraying yourself. Listen. Second, you rewrite the story. You are not broken because you feel anger. You're human. And in many ways, you're awake. The numb are quiet. The disassociated are polite. But those who are close to the truth, they burn. Nietzsche warned that he who fights with monsters must take care that he himself does not become a monster. But here's what's often left out. If you never fight at all, you remain a prisoner. Not every fight is against a monster. Sometimes it's against a molded cage made of shoulds, musts, and don'ts. To break free, you must question the cage itself. Who told you it was noble to suffer silently? Who decided that love means self-abandonment? Who benefits from your obedience? Freedom begins when you stop asking how to fit in and start asking what you were never meant to tolerate. Rebellion means going inward, not outward. It's when you sit with your rage like a teacher, not a threat. You breathe into it. You write to it. You ask it, what are you here to show me? And you will be stand by what you hear. Maybe it's a childhood memory. Maybe it's the moment you first felt invisible. Maybe it's the 1,000 paper cuts of unmet needs and unspoken truths. When you listen long enough, you'll realize your anger doesn't want destruction, it wants dignity. It wants integration. It wants the wholeness that only truth can give. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you mad." And he was right. The truth often arrives as a fire, but what it burns down is illusion. So burn. Burn the false peace that cost you your sanity. Burn the fake smile you wore to survive toxic spaces. Burn the shame that convinced you your fire was a flaw. And from those ashes, rebuild something real. How? Create boundaries so clear they sting. Speak truths so raw they tremble. Choose spaces that honor your wholeness, even the messy parts. This is not easy work, but it is sacred work, because when you reclaim your anger, you reclaim your power. And when you reclaim your power, you stop settling for crumbs. You stop tolerating friendships that drain you, jobs that diminish you, love that silences you. You start to remember yourself. And as you remember, you change. You speak more clearly. You walk more boldly. You stop over-explaining your worth. You stop shrinking. And the world will resist this. It will tell you that you've changed. It will call you difficult, selfish, intense. But that's the price of truth. And here's what they won't tell you. The moment you become truly aligned, you become dangerous not to yourself, but to every system that profited from your silence. So let them misunderstand you. Let them gossip. Let them walk away, because you finally are walking toward yourself. This is the rebellion, not against society, not against others, but against every false version of you that you were forced to become. So stand tall, hold your fire like a sword forged from centuries of silence, and step into the power that was never truly lost, only waiting to be remembered. Words. There comes a moment, a quiet one, when all the noise finally dies. After the fires of rebellion have burned, after the masks have melted, and your rage has said its piece, you're left in the stillness. Not the stillness of apathy, but the kind that feels like standing on a mountain after a long, brutal climb. The wind howls, the past echoes, and something ancient within you finally whispers, "Now, listen." The ultimate truth about anger, this wild, misunderstood force, is that it was never the enemy. It was the midwife. The pain was the passage. The storm was the teacher. You were never broken for feeling it. You were broken by believing you shouldn't. Here's what no one ever told you. Anger is love in disguise. It is the fierce devotion of your soul refusing to let you settle. It's your body screaming for alignment, your boundaries waking up, your essence remembering itself. And yet, you were taught to fear it, to demonize it, to suppress it in the name of civility, obedience, spirituality. But the great paradox is this: what you suppress becomes your prison. What you confront becomes your power. You see, the anger you buried never went away. It became anxiety. It became fatigue. It became depression, addiction, perfectionism. It dressed itself in symptoms and waited for your attention. And when you finally turned toward it, not as a beast, but as a broken truth, you began to see the anger wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to awaken you. Here's the truth most people will never accept. Your anger, at its root, is sacred. It is the fire of integrity, the revolt of your spirit against betrayal, the refusal of your soul to stay small. Psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." But what he didn't say, what we must now add, is that sometimes you must burn to give light. Sometimes the incineration of your illusions is the only way to see what was real all along. This is where healing becomes revolution, because healing isn't about calming your rage, it's about listening to it. It's about decoding its message, not acting it out recklessly, but honoring it, like a prophet with a sword of flame. Anger doesn't come to destroy you, it comes to slice through the lies. And when you listen long enough, you begin to remember who you were before the conditioning, before the conformity, before you were taught that peace meant silence. You begin to remember what it means to be whole. And this is the ultimate truth. Anger is not just a tool for survival. It is a catalyst for transformation. It is not the opposite of love. It is what love looks like when it's cornered. When you finally understand this, you stop being afraid of yourself. You stop editing your soul. You see yourself not as a problem to be managed, but a force to be understood. And from that understanding, something miraculous happens. Your anger alchemizes. It stops boiling beneath the surface and starts guiding your steps. It becomes courage. It becomes truth-telling. It becomes boundary-setting, world-building, soul-anchoring. It becomes you reborn. You are no longer the passive observer of your life. You are the author. You are the architect. You are the storm and the stillness that follows. And people will notice, not because you are louder, but because you are clearer. Not because you're meaner, but because you're wiser. Not because you want to destroy, but because you finally know what you will no longer allow to exist within you. This is what true empowerment looks like. This is what true empowerment looks like. Not the surface-level confidence sold by motivational slogans, but the kind that comes from having walked through your own darkness and come out on the other side burnt. Yes, but brighter. The kind that doesn't need approval, doesn't beg for permission, doesn't apologize for its fire, because it knows the fire was never the threat. The fire was the signal, the invitation, the sacred path back home. And now standing here you see what it was always about. It wasn't just about reclaiming anger. It was about reclaiming you, the real you, the full you, the you that doesn't need to be explained to anyone. So now the choice is yours. Will you go back, return to the smallness, the performance, the cage, or will you stay here at the edge of your own truth and build something new? You don't need to burn down the world, but you do need to stop shrinking inside it. You were born with fire in your chest. Use it, speak with it, create with it, love with it, protect with it, because the ultimate realization is this: your anger was never a flaw. It was your compass. And now that you've listened, you are free.